The age of innovation has ended. After a millennium of technological decline, where worlds once more sank into suspicion toward progress and inventions, a brief moment of enlightenment emerged. For several decades, humanity's brightest minds were freed from the fear of the new and created unprecedented wonders. But the fires of war claimed their lives and labors, and darkness returned once again. On Mars, artisans crafted the greatest masterpieces of humanity. The great adepts of the Mechanicum reached both forward to the future and backward, drawing wisdom from the past. Yet not all was destroyed. The seeds of this destruction were sown when the whispers of Horus's treachery corrupted the leaders of Mars. The pursuit of progress was replaced by envy and greed, and in the hearts of the so-called Dark Mechanicum, a hunger arose for everything their rivals had created. The grim irony of these dark days is that their greed would ultimately lead to the destruction of the innovations they sought to steal, and the ambitions of the Dark Mechanicum would crush all within their grasp. The red planet would burn in the skies of terror. And only when the smouldering embers of Mars have cooled completely, in the days following the Horus Heresy, will we understand the true tragedy of its fall. Stagnation and decline will envelop us, and each day we will sink deeper into superstition and fear. There would be no greater symbol of the heights we could have reached than Magma City, and this is the story of its end. Just as once the seers of ancient terror looked to the planets of the Sol system to predict destinies, so too must we assess the rusted Mars and ponder its role in the coming war. Attributed to Erebus, first chaplain of the Word-Bearers, it has been 5 years since Horus Lupercal ascended to the position of War Master. In his shadow, the political structures of the Imperium have been subtly reshaped, and now entire expeditionary fleets of the Great Crusade report directly to Horus, not the Emperor. Amidst the ostensible feudal obligations of the Mechanicum's hierarchy, the actual autonomy of many remote Forge worlds played to the War Master's advantage, and despite the remoteness of many of these domains from Terra, he still seeks their loyalty, as in the case of Mars itself. Once having warred with the armies of the Emperor in the distant years of unification, Mars and the Mechanicum as a whole remained strange partners of the Imperium, as their tenuous sovereignty was based solely on the supply of material resources for the Imperial war machine. Many on the Red Planet closely observed the technologies and projects being developed on Terra, convinced of a gradual accumulation of power intended for the final subjugation of the cult of Mechanicum after the completion of the Great Crusade. And now the Crusade is drawing to a close. Foreseeing war brewing in the shadows, some are crafting their own plans to secede from the Imperium, making them easy prey for the allure of Horus, who recruits new followers into his camp. Despite its proximity to Terra, Mars began to seethe from the mounting tension. And as the War Master ignited his civil war, spilling blood on the worlds of Istvan, the Red Planet inexorably inched towards its own bloody conflict. It was in this unstable time that a long-absent son returned to the Forge world Primus, delivered on a battered ship of metal and chrome. The 10th Legion had always been a close ally of the Mechanicum, thus the vessel Entropy discreetly docked at the Iron Ring's docks, though the individual it delivered to the Red Planet was far from the typical representative of the Martian priesthood. Magister Regulus, emissary of the Mechanicum to the War Master, surreptitiously returned to his long-abandoned home, sent by the 63rd Expeditionary Fleet, along with a delegation of Horus-loyal Iron Hands, to set in motion events that would eternally stain the face of Mars. The death of innocence. This is how history named the brutal war unleashed on Mars in the opening days of the Horus Heresy, instigated by the ambitions of Kelbor-Hal, the Fabricator-General of Mars, and his allegiance to the War Master, as a wave of bloodshed and upheaval swept across the Red Planet. Tens of millions were slain in the days that followed, as the beating heart of human innovation was ignited, and millennia of accumulated wisdom were lost in the flames. What follows is merely a brief overview of the destruction that erupted on Mars, with a detailed account of those events on the planet and in its vicinity whose impact could not be ignored. The 5th year of the 31st millennium, the First Blood. Epluvian Maximal, ruler of the Manufactorums, calls upon ancient pacts sealed with House Tyrannus, requesting aid from the house's knights to combat the marauding servitor pacts. A trio of house offspring marches to battle, and though their strength far outmatches the mindless servitors, the situation deteriorates when a detachment of sigil-less protectors joins the fray. Alongside them strides an automaton of unknown origin, whose power and resilience surpass even the knights. The knights of House Taranis are crippled by the unknown automaton and survive only by chance. The rampant servitors breach the protective casing of the Manufactorum's thermonuclear reactor, whereupon the surrounding structures are consumed by waves of plasma. The only survivors are the wounded knights, with no trace left of the automatons or servitors. The 5th year of the 31st millennium, the Grudge of the Titans. Tension between the Martian legions Mortis and Tempestus, ancient rivals since the Age of Strife, intensifies. And several months before the siege of Magma City, 2 legions of Titans clashed in battle multiple times. Secretly, Princeps Camulus, commanding the Legio Mortis on Mars, vowed his Titan to serve the Fabricator-General in the upcoming conquest of the Red Planet until the end, as he saw the opportunity to finally quell the Stormlords. The combat reaches its peak when the Legio Mortis breaches the line of storms, the ancient border between the domains of the 2 legions. Grand Master Indius Cavalerio of the Legio Tempestus is gravely injured along with his Titan, while hastening to join his legion in defense of their territory. The 5th year of the 31st millennium, the Scrapcode Plague. Under the cloak of secrecy, Magos Regulus, emissary of the Mechanicum to Horus, returns to Mars to meet with the Fabricator-General. No evidence of communication between them exists, yet shortly after, Kelbor-Hal begins mobilizing his allies for war against the Imperium. As the hour of treachery approaches, the vaults of Moravec, an ancient crypt of knowledge forbidden access by the Emperor, are opened, not without the assistance of Horus Lupercal. For days, the plague of scrap code infests the data networks of Mars, plunging the Red Planet into chaos. Like a ravenous predator desperately seeking food, the code hunts down every bit of data, violating security protocols and corroding everything it can reach. Automata and servitors turn against their masters as the scrap code corrupts them, and the consciousness of the Magos, linked to data management, collapses into catatonia from the overwhelming influx of malicious code. Here and there, security protocols are revoked, resulting in plasma reactors melting down, transforming the surrounding red sands into glass. Yet death brought on by the malicious code was not always instantaneous. Forges deemed by Kelbor-Hal fit for conquest lose their protection, becoming vulnerable to the hordes of traitors now marching across Mars. The 5th year of the 31st millennium, the destruction of the Kefra Forge. The Forge of Magos Matthias. Kefra resounds with screams, as if from the nightmare times of the Old Night, when the Titans of Legio Magna unleash their wrath upon it. The Kefra Forge is ill-prepared to withstand the divine machines, its walls quickly reduced to ruins, and its scant defensive forces, chiefly infantry and automata, are swept away with little effort, vast data libraries reduced to ash and ammunition stores obliterated. The wanton massacre enacted by the Legio Magna continues deep into the night, and their princeps delight in the destruction they have wrought, amplifying their Titans' battle cries with vox recordings of the death screams of their victims. The 5th year of the 31st millennium, the siege of Ulysses Patera. The hive of Gigas Sulci flung open its gates, and a multitude of altered war machines, Skitari and Dark Mechanicum Magos surged toward the crater forges of Ipluvian Maximal. The messages reaching the Maximal allies speak of assault constructs, bolstering the attacking warriors of Tagmata, armed with weapons capable of piercing unstable tears in the fabric of reality. The traitors achieve significant advancements, but fail to cross the ridge of Ulysses Patera before the Maximal forces drive them back. However, the victory of the Loyalists is not great, for Ulysses Patera is surrounded and besieged. The 5th year of the 31st millennium, the grave of the Fire Wasps. Legio Ignatum, the gravest threat to the coup, unfolding on Mars by the Fabricator-General, falls prey to the Dark Mechanicum. Drawn by the threat of the warlike princeps of Legio Pyria, the Fire Wasps engage in battle with the smaller Legio throughout the night amidst the mountainous terrain of the valley. Having destroyed a large number of divine machines before retreating to rearm, the Fire Wasps were satisfied that the traitorous Legio had been subdued. However, as the Fire Wasps withdraw, the rising sun illuminates the silhouette of a new cohort of divine machines advancing in march. Waiting until the Titans of Ignatum expend most of their ammunition and their reactors burn white-hot, one maniple of Legio Mortis directs a combined force of Legio Damnosus and Legio Tenerii to annihilate their long-standing rivals. In the Apocrypha of the Fire Wasps, it is often recounted that a neophyte princeps, stunned by the sudden ambush and blinded by the rising sun, mistakenly fired the first shot at a Titan of Legio Ignatum, a grim omen that would seal the fate of every Titan of the Fire Wasps on Mars. The 5th year of the 31st millennium, shadows over Tharsis. Augur stations spread throughout the Tharsis quadrant, controlled from Magma City, report the movement of several large armies in this region. Soon after, contact is lost with the Pilgrim Skitarii recon patrols, and their last message warns of swift walkers armed with mechadendrites and servo limbs bristling with malevolent blades. Hours and days pass, and more reconnaissance stations fall silent, leaving Magma City blinded to the enemy's movements. The city, at last, has become vulnerable to an assault. The 5th year of the 31st millennium, the massacre at Mare Tyrrhenum, within the Herschel Basin, a scar on the face of Mars where Prometheum refueling stations are located, about 1 million soldiers of Tagmata and constructs of the Dark Mechanicum collide. The ensuing brutal slaughter is prompted solely by the convergence of marching armies and had no strategic significance. Yet both sides fight to the bitter end. Less than 1/5 of all the combatants manage to escape death, and the survivors scatter across the Red Sands, their further fate remaining unknown. The 5th year of the 31st millennium. The purging of Eridania. In the archive tended by the scribes of the Omnissiah's all-seeing eye, seismic alarms of warning are sounded. Hundreds of subterranean assault transports breach the lower catacombs, with tech priests loyal to Kelbor-Hal infiltrating the hermetically sealed data vault, killing all the archivists they find as they advance toward the control center of the archive. However, the assault on the archive was not aimed at conquest, but its annihilation. Upon reaching the core, the invaders release malicious code that rapidly infiltrates the archive's system. Theses of renowned scholars and countless treatises of priceless knowledge are erased, and the living are cleansed in a similar manner. Deactivation protocols are altered and modified, and caustic gases burst forth from the pipes, killing both archivists and invaders. The 5th year of the 31st millennium, loyalist reinforcements. At those pockets of resistance that maintain loyalty to the Emperor, hope emerges as golden yellow warships descend from orbit. The transports belong to the Imperial Fists Legion, and as they approach the surface, they split into 2 strike groups. In the warfare engulfing Mars, the 7th Legion seeks to secure the 2 primary forge complexes on the Red Planet, supplying weapons and equipment to their legion. The 1st Strike Detachment, under the command of 1st Captain Sigismund, lands at Fabricator-Locum-Kane's forge, fortifying its defences and establishing a foothold on the planet. Supply ships descend to the surface to initiate the process of delivering materials to the legions in orbit, while Sigismund attempts to establish control over the surrounding region, conducting raids on traitor outposts. The 2nd Strike Group under Captain Camba Diaz attempts to land at Lucas Crom's forge, but is soon forced to leave. As defensive guns open fire on the strike vessel, Captain Camba Diaz directs his ships to the border of Crom's holdings and initiates a series of raiding operations to seize as many vital resources as possible. The 5th year of the 31st millennium, the fall of Magna City. Magna City is under siege. Legio Mortis strikes from the northwest, seizing the outer district and piercing the first major redoubt defending the forge. Here the remaining titans of Legio Tempestus boldly declare themselves against their long-time rivals. While the central districts descend into an all-consuming titan war, an apparently endless wave of Tagmata soldiers and constructs of the Dark Mechanicum clash with the forces of Supreme Adept Coriel Zeth, the ruler of Magna City. As they advance through the Typhon Pass and zones ravaged by Mortis Titans, the traitors gradually overcome the defenders as Legio Mortis Titans themselves approach the heart of the Forge. Refusing to surrender her city to the Dark Mechanicum, Supreme Adept Coriel Zeth triggers a cataclysm, engulfing Magna City in lava. She drowns both traitors and loyalists in flames as the last surviving warriors of Legio Tempestus and House Tyrannus on Mars meet a martyr's death. The 5th year of the 31st millennium, Hidden Blades. After the destruction of Magma City, the surviving forces of the Dark Mechanicum, who had besieged the Forge, come together, and Tagmata Taul reunites with its Archmagos, accompanied by the last fragments of the supreme Tagmata Excubitii, serving Kelbor-Hal. Amidst the sulphurous vapours and the yet uncooled lava, Archmagos Lastaul directs her forces in retribution, joining with the Fabricator-General's Tagmata, crafting her own narrative of the city's end without relying on the testimony of those who have not sworn direct allegiance to her. In the subsequent months and years, Archmagos Lastaul gains Kelbor-Hal's favour, often leading Dark Mechanicum armies to eradicate loyalist enclaves across Mars and securing ever more extensive dominion among the Red Sands. The 5th year of the 31st millennium, the blockade of Mars. As Kelbor-Hal and his allies seize most of Mars, with loyalist resistance points either surrounded or hidden, the Imperial fists begin retreating from the Red Planet. High-ranking Mechanicum officials, such as Zagreus Kane, evacuate, and all material assets claimable by the Loyalists are ferried to orbit. Meanwhile, the Solar Fleet controls orbital access to the Red Planet, destroying any Mechanicum vessel attempting to leave Mars, regardless of its declared loyalty. No vessel except those sanctioned by Rogel Dawn himself is permitted to approach the Red Planet. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, Loyalist strike teams thwart any attempts to smuggle supplies for the War Master's army. The 5th year of the 31st millennium, the Phantoms of Tharsis. 3 months after the destruction of Forge Epluvian Maximal, the surviving units of the 1st and 9th cohorts of the Saturnine Rams strike the Titan Assembly shipyards in Olympica Fosse. Taking refuge among the Loyalist Mechanicum outcasts after the failed defense of Forge Maximal, Solar Auxilia begins cooperating with these wayward tech priests in a bid to sabotage the work on several surviving Titans undergoing refit to bolster the depleted arsenal of Legio Mortis. Successfully breaching the defensive cordon of the Titan yards, Saturnine Rams gather at the base of one of the immense workshops, fending off waves of armed servitors, while the tech priests feverishly work on rebooting the reactors slumbering within the Titans. Events turn against the Loyalists when one of the Titans somehow awakens, entering a frenzy as it tries to tear out some esoteric components recently implanted in its chassis. The divine machine nearly obliterates the surviving Saturnine Rams, as well as numerous constructs of the Dark Mechanicum. As a result, the operation of the Loyalists and the infrastructure of the Titan shipyards receives significant damage, the full restoration of which will take years, and the culprit of the destruction, the rampaging Titan, rushes into the wastelands of Mars. Mars, the heart of the Imperium's might, its countless forge, feeds the insatiable hunger of the Great Crusade, but they themselves are sustained by the endless spoils ferried from shattered and conquered worlds across the galaxy. It is the ritual Center Mechanicum, the birthplace of the cult of the machine and the domain of its most powerful sovereign, the Fabricator-General Mechanicum. From his forge, he administers rulership over this secretive sect of humanity, and his mandates echo through the Forge worlds in the galaxy's distant corners. Ultimately, Mars is one of the greatest fortresses of the Imperium, each of its cities a citadel, and each manufactorum a barrack. Here reside billions of warriors both of flesh and of iron, and some of the mightiest legions of Imperium Titans stand ready to defend Mars against any invader daring to threaten the planet. Mars is a highly inhospitable world, engulfed in dust storms that rage across the arid red plains stretching from pole to pole. Its air is heavily tainted with the scent of industry, and only the most resilient servitors those enhanced with specific genes or empowered adepts can breathe it for long. Yet few dare venture into the vast wastes beyond the forged cities. Each of these massive cities is the domain of one of Mars' Archmagos, and all within their walls, from inhabitant to machine, are wholly subjugated to the will of their master. However, the Archmagos themselves care not for the loyalty of their subjects, but only for the refinement of their craft, to glorify the name of the Omnissiah. It is these tech priests who govern the desolate world, with the Fabricator-General standing above them as the supreme authority on Mars. Mars suffered greatly during the upheavals of the Horus Heresy. However, the fires of war were kindled and sustained not by external forces but by its own rulers. Wishing that none would oppose him when he defected to Horus, Fabricator-General Kelbor-Hal unleashed all the weaponry at his disposal, targeting any forge whose overlord was not loyal to him. Nuclear explosions, bioweapons, and swarms of drone assassins descended upon an unprepared Mars, followed by armies of Magos traitors and the colossal titans of Legio Mortis. Entire cities were wiped from existence, mountains leveled, and vast sections of the planet rendered uninhabitable for many centuries. Mars, despite its value to the Imperium, was shown no mercy, and the Horus Heresy has left an indelible mark on the red face of this world. Figures move, and new forces emerge from the shadows, offering their aid to those discerning enough to heed them. Attributed to Magister Regulus. Kelbor-Hal stood at the pinnacle of a pyramid comprised of the intricate loyalties and devotion of the Mechanicum, and to fulfill his role as the War Master, Horus needed to remain in the favor of the Lord of Mars. At what exact point the consolidation of power for the newly minted War Master turned into thoughts of usurpation and treachery is unknown. Yet by the end of the Great Crusade, Horus entrusted the Fabricator-General to ensure that the armies of Mars were loyal to him and directly obeyed his commands. While Horus made the final preparations to purge his legion of those who could not be trusted in the war against the Emperor, Magos Regulus conveyed the War Master's last fateful demand to Kelbor-Hal, who was already set on a path toward the very brink of separatism. In exchange for turning against the Emperor and siding with Horus in the impending civil war, Regulus promised Kelbor-Hal untold wealth, from blueprints of Xenos technology plundered during the Great Crusade to the complete removal of restrictions on research imposed by the Emperor. But most importantly, Regulus brought with him the means to unlock the legendary vaults of Moravec, buried beneath the Fabricator-General's forge on Olympus Mons but hidden from the Mechanicum by the Emperor's hand nearly 2 centuries ago, when the Master of Mankind first set foot on the Red Planet. For a long time, Mars had been on the brink not only of internal schism but also of conflict with the Imperium itself. And now, as Kelbor-Hal delved deeply into the treasury of forbidden knowledge offered to him, it remained to be seen how far into the depths of nightmare the Red Planet would plunge. Far beneath the massive structures of Olympus Mons, the vaults of Moravec were opened, and within them lay something more than mere technology. The product of ancient pacts made with loathsome entities whispering from the depths of the warp, contained within this cursed treasury, promised boundless power to the Fabricator-General. But once the vaults of Moravec were opened, these warp entities began to seep into reality, slowly and inexorably, consuming and decaying everything they touched. It was scrap code, a cacophony of pernicious, unwanted data and indifferent infodemons, utterly incomprehensible to most who had the misfortune to encounter it, yet relentlessly driven by a malevolent intelligence from beyond the material plane. It was a creeping blight, threatening to destroy all the Mechanicum had created, and Kelbor-Hal willingly stepped into its pernicious embrace. As Kelbor-Hal began to use this prize to bolster the armies of Mars, his subordinates, aware of the impending conflict, yearned to bring long, simmering animosities to a brutal climax. And though the Fabricator-General manipulated, persuaded and compelled many high-ranking Archmagos, both on the Red Planet and beyond, who fell within his sphere of influence. However, the Mechanicum was an ancient structure, whose forces could never be fully subjugated in the few short years since the War Master took his position. To fulfill Horus's demand, the Fabricator-General would have to rid the planet of those who claimed his power. Delegate Kelbor-Hal, Archimandrite orator Melgator, was sent to those lords of Mars who could still be convinced before the fires of war erupted, while where trust could not be secure beforehand, spies and assassins from the camp of future traitors did their work, undermining the defences of all who wished to oppose Kelbor-Hal, paving the way for his armies. In the Pallidus wastes, sprawling between the foundries of the Tharsis quadrangle, the dark creations unleashed by Lucas Crom threatened to start open war prematurely. The Kaban machine, violating all imperial laws and prohibiting the creation of so-called heretical intelligence, was released on a path of destruction, accompanied by the Myrmidons' sect, massive tech priests who were to report on its capabilities to the traitors' troops and eliminate all loyalist witnesses, while Melgator engaged in the fine art of diplomacy with the last Martian Archmagos who could still be swayed to the traitors' side. The destructive path of the Kaban machine led it southeast of Olympus Mons, into an expansive rift, to a chain of reactors located at its heart. Here, the belligerent construct, which matched a scout titan in height and power, engaged in battle with a trio of knights from House Tyrannus, attempting to break through to one of the humming reactors. While the faceless Myrmidons' entourage fired upon the knights and hordes of defending servitors, the scions of House Tyrannus sought to discern the nature of their enemy, risking every second to gain a clue that could lead to Lucas Crom. Yet they could not make such inferences since the Kaban machine detonated the reactor, annihilating all but the knights of House Tyrannus nearby, and then vanished once more into the wasteland. Information about the surviving knights brought the confrontation between forces in the Tharsis quadrangle even closer to open bloodshed, as accusations were leveled against the supposed creators of the carbon machine. This escalation served as a convenient smokescreen for the traitors preparing their forces for the conquest of Mars. Ignoring the moratorium imposed on duels of honor by the Martian Parliament, a dozen duels of honor took place between members of the knightly houses Morbidia and Zavora, and only 3 of these duels ended without the death of one or both offspring of the house involved. In the dust-filled skies of Tharsis, the demarcation of airspace became the embodiment of the clashing ambitions of the Mechanicum's warlords. Servitor-driven vulture squadrons compelled entire cargo convoys to land amidst the Red Sands as their commanders adhered to ancient territorial treaties long stripped of their relevance. In the ashen wastelands of Pallidus, throngs of mindless thrall hunters and belligerent automata clashed ever more frequently, with automatic protocols prescribing them to scour the wastelands in search of ferals becoming an easy pretext for unsanctioned conflict, as they were massively deployed by feuding Archmagos. While the traitor lords prepared the stage for the impending conflict, the corruption emerging from the vaults of Moravec began to find its path across Mars, already raging in the forges of Olympus Mons, as Kelbor-Hal clandestinely turned the output of his manufactorums into new perverted instruments of war. A toxic industrial smog, which had always wafted around the forge furnaces, now transformed into a veritable storm, hanging over the colossal volcano like a harbinger of doom. The plague spread across Mars, creeping through crypts and infiltrating loyalist citadels within convoys, and where the deleterious code reached the forges and Mechanicum installations, it unleashed its unbridled potency. Ancient data vaults and control systems were obliterated, targeting engrams damaged, and communication networks clogged with shrieking interference, while entire hordes of servitors and servo-automata were gripped by madness. Every forge touched by the scrap code endured hundreds of simultaneous acts of sabotage, as the code spread tore vast swathes of infrastructure asunder, infecting systems regulating every aspect of Martian life. With reactors failing unexpectedly in places, environmental control systems annihilating entire work shifts, and automated targeting systems consigning entire cargo fleets to the abyss. Yet, most military systems were protected by secondary layers of Aegis protocols that functioned so well that the influx of any external data was rendered impossible. and although most Martian guns and turrets did not turn against their masters, the devastation wrought by the unleashed scrap code on the Red Planet was astronomical. Within minutes, the toll of victims reached millions, and soon the cataclysm earned the designation of Death of Innocence from the lips of the Martian Magos. The utter chaos engendered by the scrap code was not indiscriminate, for its entire devastating impact befell only those forges that chose to uphold allegiance to the Emperor or remained aloof from the impending conflict. However, the malicious infodemons also infected the faithful Magos of Kelbor-Hal and their mechanisms, but did so in a much more insidious manner. The scrap code in the traitors' forges seemed to enhance almost every system it touched, though most began to function erratically afterward, while the living infected became more brutal and belligerent. Due to the scarcity of reliable information, such discrepancies were simply attributed to the insane nature of the code itself, although in truth, as the wave of disaster swept across Mars, a new Dark Mechanicum firmly established itself among the shadows. While the enemies of the Fabricator-General received thousands of blows, the regions directly bordering Olympus Mons proved unexpectedly resilient to the covert assault. The forged cities of Coriel-Zeth, Zagreus Cain, and Epluvian Maximal avoided the devastation observed elsewhere, as each employed the cornerstone noospheric technologies developed by High Adept Coriel-Zeth, which slowed and contained the attacking scrap code long enough for external connections to be severed. This measure limited the damage inflicted by the malignant code. Though waves of chaos and murder swept through the forges, its impact within the domains of the three Magos was not as extensive. However, the restoration of the damage is estimated to require several months of strenuous effort by the Magos Logis to clean the scrap code from the peripheral systems. Meeting remotely, Zeth, Cain, and Maximal agreed that the data corruption on the planet is likely a prelude to some larger conflict, although its nature and the party behind it remain unclear. Each resolved to call their allies to arms in preparation for what might come. Even when High Adept Zeth received word of an envoy arriving from the Fabricator-General, she nonetheless sent a message to the Knights of House Tyrannus and the Titans of Legio Tempestus, urging them to face the coming darkness together as allies. It was a wise decision, as during the preparations of the Dark Mechanicum for war, the forges of Coriel-Zeth and Magma City were given particular prominence by order of Magister Regulus himself. And now, as scrap code raged across Mars, the traitors began to act in accordance with his instructions. Resorting to honeyed words and veiled threats, Archimandrite orator Melgator initially inquired of Zeth how her forge resisted the incursion of malicious code, hinting that, beyond the proposed explanation of the noospheric aegis, her city's defenders might also include some project she was striving to conceal. Enraged by the Fabricator-General's intrusion into her affairs, Zeth became even more infuriated when Melgator revealed Kelbor-Hal's plans against the Imperium. The envoy claimed that the attack using scrap code had been undertaken by the Emperor himself to accomplish a long-held intention to ultimately subjugate Mars. However, Coriel rejected Kelbor-Hal's final attempt to sway her to his side. She expelled Melgator from her city, fully aware that such behavior would most likely lead to war with the armies of the Fabricator-General sooner or later. It was less than a week before Melgator returned, and his sweet words had turned to venom. Despite the total destruction that was destined to befall Magma City, when Kelbor-Hal's army approached its walls, the High Adept Zeth ensured that the details of what was happening on Mars were preserved. Utilizing the noospheric channels she bequeathed to those who kept faith in Magma City, Zeth disseminated selected records from the city archives widely. Among them was an obscure repository, whose location was lost in the ensuing chaos and only discovered during the Great Purge. Much of the data preserved there was used to establish the continuity of this record, but thanks to the retrospective insight that emerged after the Horus Heresy, secondary records related to Zeth's hidden project may shed light on patterns that existed long before the Dark Mechanicum's assault on Magma City. In the final years of the Great Crusade, Zeth, openly defiant of traditions yet respected for the technological advances achieved through her work, turned to a more esoteric means of acquiring new knowledge. This project, named the Akashic Reader, and developed from technology stolen from Terra by the Martian Magos in previous centuries, was believed, at least theoretically, to tap into a metaphysical reservoir of knowledge purportedly stored within the warp. To realize such a project required the channeling of raw psychic energy, in this instance readily provided by the Astronomicon through thousands of psychers imprisoned, and each infused with knowledge of specific technological spheres strictly regulated by the Imperial Court itself. The acquisition of the resources necessary for creating such a device, and which Szeth is believed to have completed shortly before the death of Innocence, was possible only with the tacit consent of the Imperial Court. As it is known, the Supreme Adept received psychers directly from the holds of black ships. However, considering the interest that Regulus, and through him Horus, exhibited towards Szeth's work during the Martian Schism, some suspicion arises whether Horus used his position as War Master to secretly supply Szeth with the resources she needed to complete her work on the Akashic Reader, concealed at the very threshold of the Imperial Court. This supposition would undoubtedly explain the successive attempts by the Dark Mechanicum to undermine, then co-opt, and finally conquer Szeth's domain. For every attempt to sway the Mistress of Magma City to the traitor's side was known to have been conducted at Regulus's behest. Were not the traitors thereby seeking to seize the technology in which Horus had invested so much effort and resources? From the polluted skies of Mars descended Melgatus forces, the beetle-like macro-carrier landing halfway to the city at the statue-adorned Typhon Causeway, the only route into Magma City, which was walled off to the south by an enormous sea of lava. From there emerged the Tagmata Melgata's legions, massive phalanxes of tech priests, and the grim detachments of myrmidons, marked by the indelible corruption inflicted upon them in the vaults of Moravec, manifesting as halos of boiling energy. Leading this host was a massive, much larger than the others, machine with a spiked palanquin atop it, bearing not only Melgator, but the Master himself, Lictornex Regulus, the War Master's hand, finally stepping forth from the shadows. At the edge of the volcano's gates that sealed access to Szeth's forge, the traitor forces arrayed themselves with the grandeur and pomp characteristic of imperial armies. Each of the two Archmagos wielded a Baroque staff in anticipation of taking the High Adept under their custody, aiming to escort her to stand trial before Kelbor-Hal. Standing at the doors of Szeth, they accused her of heresy, breach of feudal obligations to the Fabricator-General, and apostasy against the divinity of the Omnissiah, each charge accompanied by a wave of howling scrap code attempting to breach the defensive network of Magma City. Having failed to persuade Szeth of their case, the Dark Mechanicum now aimed to simply wrest Magma City from her control through the use of infodemons. Although the Forged City had previously been resilient to such assaults, it could not withstand the proximity to the source of the scrap code, bolstered by the forces of Regulus. One by one, the numerous gun emplacements surrounding the volcano's gates fell silent, and the final battery shuddered and deactivated at the very moment the colossal city's doors began to open. Out of the gates emerged Coriel Szeth, the cold light of her forge cutting through the orange glow, and the noise of the relentless activity inside the forge rivaling the cacophony of scrap code. She disdainfully rejected all of the Dark Mechanicum's demands, as well as the authority of Kelbor-Hal, given his betrayal of the Emperor. However, when Melgator dispatched his forces to execute Kelbor-Hal's judgment in absentia, the Archimandrite orator realized his miscalculation. As the volcano's gates swung wider, a dozen more figures joined the silhouette of Szeth, illuminated by the forge's light, each thrice the height of a battle tank. The Knights of Tyrannus had sworn allegiance to the Mistress of the Forge and stood in defense of Magma City. And even if the city's entire defense had been deactivated, this single battle group could obliterate all the forces of the traitors. Regulus unleashed another wave of scrap code. However, the offspring of Tyrannus were prepared. They had preemptively shielded their systems from the incoming code and stood their ground, ignoring the assaulting infodemons while defiantly sounding their battle horns. The traitors fled, and Szeth retained the Knights of Tyrannus, still faintly hoping that war could be averted. Following the abrupt retreat of Regulus and Melgator, the long-simmering flame of war, fanned by the Dark Mechanicum, finally erupted into an all-consuming conflagration. Across Mars, the forces of Kelbor-Hal marched to war, descending upon the Forge armies already weakened by the destructive impact of scrap code. For most, it amounted to little more than slaughter, and as the red planet blazed around her, High Adept Szeth prepared for what was undoubtedly shaping up to be her last audacious stand. The Forge of Magma City, an enormous metropolis whose vastness encased immense hives, situated on the southwestern flank of Asia Mons, the southernmost of the three volcanoes that diagonally bisected the heart of the Tharsis quadrangle. The city of Supreme Adept Szeth, neighbouring the Forge Temple of Ipluvian Maximal to the north and Mondus Gamma to the east, was the smallest of those situated in Tharsis, yet it was a truly unique specimen of Mechanicum technological craftsmanship. An entire forge served to harness the volcanic power of Asia Mons, revived so that its heat and ore could fuel the industry of Magma City, a feat unmatched by any other city prior to Mars. Aetna's Dam, the cornerstone of Magma City's infrastructure, operating on lava. This construction of truly breathtaking scale occupied perhaps 1/6 of the territory and towered kilometers above the Forge Temple. A system of locks and sluice gates, shielded by signal screens, allowed the dam to control the flow of lava from the volcano, directing it into a quartet of massive aqueducts, with the excess diverted into a colossal lava channel that circumnavigated the city's eastern flank and flowed into the lagoon. Within the caldera itself resided 6 enormous magmatic gravitational generators that drew magma from beneath Mars' crust and continually churned the sea of molten rock in the caldera to prevent it from cooling. Beyond the volcano, around which the forge was situated, the most notable landmark of Magma City was Thales Lagoon, a vast internal sea of lava encircling the eastern, southern and southwestern edges of the metropolis of Supreme Adept Szeth. Thales Lagoon gradually emerged over several centuries due to the excess lava flowing from Asia Mons, as well as being filled with molten rock from lava channels and aqueducts laid through the districts of Magma City. All the lava of Asia Mons not mined for ore ultimately settled in the churning expanses of the lagoon. Extending for miles from the southern shore of the lagoon are processing platforms, a web of channels through which excess lava flows into the sprawling mass of automated ore-harvesting combines, sifting through vast quantities of molten rock to extract the rarest minerals. Along the northern shore of this glowing sea stretch the walls of Magma City, whose base constantly flickers from the efforts of a vast network of shields holding back the heat of Thales Lagoon. The only breach in this curving structure was the massive portal known as the Gates of the Volcano, marking the northwestern protrusion of the Typhon Dam, the sole crossing connecting Thales Lagoon to the city. The width of this passage was so great that it could allow an entire maniple of Titans to march abreast. The Asia Mons starport, along with the warehouses and the hives, beginning at the western extremity of Thalia Lagoon and curving northeast to the foot of the great volcano after which they were named, formed a colossal industrial zone on the northern outskirts of Magma City. Outside lay the vast landing pads of the Asia Mons starport, capable of accommodating entire fleets of the largest macro dropship models in the Imperium, transporting the produce of Magma City into orbit. Encircling these orbital infrastructure facilities stretched nearly endless storage areas, immense forests stacked with transport containers, warehouses with products where all kinds of resources were stored for import and export from Magma City. Besides the Asia Mons starport, the cornerstone of this supply chain was the cluster of high-speed highways, located in a vast canyon on the western outskirts of Magma City. Stretching north to the forge of the General Fabricator at Olympus Mons, and east to connect with the city of Maximal, these transit routes allowed the exchange of raw materials and specialized goods with each of the 3 forges in truly staggering volumes. In essence, this region of constant activity was separated from Magma City by the immense buildings of the hive cities, the largest of which could easily rival an entire imperial hive city. Here resided the billion-strong crowds of the Forge's workers, and the massive hives served as a natural defense for the outskirts of the city and the heart of the Forge, with a defensive line of trenches and palisades segregating them from the storage facilities stretching north and west. The heart of Magma City was divided into 3 main districts. Each of these districts was walled off from the hives and each other by towering fortress walls. The redoubts of Adjunct, Centralis, and Primus, whose numerous defensive structures were directly powered by thermal aqueducts running from the dam. The Adjunct Forge districts comprised the westernmost and largest part of Magma City. Being adjacent to the Arcia Mons hives, they were dedicated to the most labor-intensive types of production due to their proximity to the main residential center of the Temple Forge. To the east lay the Centralis district, which also served as barracks for the majority of the Tagmata, and was the smallest of these 3 districts. The Primus district was the easternmost part of Magma City. It was situated at the bend of Thalea Lagoon, where the city's most advanced industrial and scientific facilities were located, many of which were deep beneath the surface of Mars. Towering over it all was the Prytaneum, the massive forge ziggurat of Supreme Adept Zeth, situated at the heart of the Primus Forge districts and serving as an endless repository of forgecraft. Across the expanse of these forge districts lay a web of underground enclosed channels and sealed reservoirs, distributing the flow of lava from the dam throughout the forge complex, providing copious amounts of energy and materials for the ceaseless production in the forges of Magma City.